All right, everybody, it looks like I am live. So we are going to pitter patter and let's get at her pretty soon. A little delayed reaction, so I'm going to wait to see who's all on board. By all means, let me know you're out there. As soon as you're out there, hit your smiley faces and your likes and all the rest of it, and get them across the screen so that people will know that we're live and we're out there, and we'll be able to get going discussing the steroid years. This is something that's been a long time coming. People have been asking me to do this in one format or another for many, many years. And then recently, with a retrospective article series I was writing on my career, more and more people said, are you gonna get into it? Are you gonna get into it? So yep, we're gonna get into it. And hopefully people will benefit from it. And I probably am gonna have to do, I think, more than one webinar on this. I was wanting to do this for a long time, so nothing to hide. Just the timing was wrong for several reasons. But recently, I was watching some online stuff, YouTube and whatnot, with interviews from retired bodybuilders and stuff who were claiming to like keeping it real, but they were really, really playing down what was going on in the drug side of the culture. So that kind of like made me even want to do this even more. Like I felt like saying, oh, come on, really? This is what you're going to tell people? So that kind of bothered me a little bit, having been an insider for a long, long time. I know there were some questions submitted, so I'm going to get to those as well. But I do have my own little, I want to do a sort of build up and a preamble just so people will get what's going on. And then hopefully people will join in. And again, it's an Ask Me Anything session. So it's not going to be all about what I have to say. I just want to zip through some stuff. And then hopefully we'll get some people on board. So hit your share buttons and hit your, hit whatever and your emoticons, and hopefully people will start to get on board sooner than later. And hopefully you can all see and hear me just fine. And I'll get to the matter at hand. So if you guys are ready, let me know, and I'll just get at it with just a quick little PowerPoint thing, and then I'll get right into your questions and whatnot, or discussions. I can even freelance if needs be, and then we can get going. So I don't know why my screen just disappeared, so I'm just waiting for that to come back, and then I'm going to get there. So I'm going to share a little PowerPoint with you that sort of takes you along the career trajectory, and then I'll get right to your questions. So hopefully we'll get more people on board. People wanted this for a long time, and then they don't tend to show up. Maybe the subject matter is something that worries people. But I'm going to put this up. Let me know you can see it. So I'm just going to whip through some things because it reminds me of other stuff. So we're going to get going on that. So as you can see here, hopefully you can see that plain and clear. I know it's not taking up a lot of stuff. So let me just wait till I'm done this, and then I will get to the questions, because I know people are firing questions already, which is great. But let's just hold off. So in 1983, I was already competing, and I was natural. And that already had its sort of own little quirks to it, because I came from a powerlifting gym where steroids were kind of like a secret people were talking about in the corner, and you were either in or you were out. And by 1985, as you can see here, I was still natural, but I was making huge gains. And what ended up happening is I was being accused of taking steroids, even though I was natural. And as a young kid, of course, that really didn't sit well with me. It really ticked me off. So that was almost in and of itself a sort of a motivating factor to say, oh, yeah, well, imagine what I'd be like on them, kind of thing. And then the whole sort of out in the open thing was starting to change. And we changed right along with it, as I've been writing about in my blogs. So in 1986, I went in and I was still making incredible gains. And it was an intro to the steroid world, but you have to remember things were way different in 1986. This was before the Ben Johnson thing broke and all hell broke open, you were still going to your doctor for prescriptions. So we always figured, if a doctor would prescribe it for non-medical uses, then, why should we be morally questioning it or whatever? So there was a little bit of rationalization going on. But this was me winning the overall title in 1986. But let me just say the doses here were ridiculous. I mean, everyone, including the doctors, were naive. So back in 1986, you still had doctors saying that steroids didn't work. The research wasn't equivocal. Did it work? Didn't it work? And a lot of that had to do with the doses. So the doses were so minuscule and minor, laughable, actually. My first prescription for Winstrol V tablets, now that's tablets, not injectables, they're 2 milligram tablets, and I took 2 of them 3 times a day. So two 2 milligram tablets, so 4 milligrams 3 times a day was 12 milligrams of Winstrol V, which is hilarious because bikini competitors take more than that now, combined with some other things. But that just shows you how nobody really knew, including the doctors, what was an efficacious dose, what was over an anabolic threshold, those kind of things. So even though it began in 1986, the doses were so tiny and so minuscule. The effects were still probably visible because receptors had never had to deal with any kind of altering chemistry like that, but it wasn't nearly what would happen later on. For instance, I talked about this, and maybe it's in an upcoming blog, but if you understand how pharmaceuticals work, injectable drugs are always stronger than oral drugs because oral drugs have to go through the liver, et cetera, et cetera. So the Winstrol tabs I was prescribed were 2 milligrams. And within a couple years, we would be getting injectable Winstrol V from veterinarian sources for horses. And those were 50 milligrams per mil, 50 milligrams per mil, which already by injection acts way stronger than the oral. So you can see how things would escalate in a very, very short time. So by 1987, this was me winning the Great Lakes Championships. We were starting to get introduced to a plethora of how drugs worked, why they worked. People were more open about discussing it. But there was still kind of self-education going on. Nobody really knew anything. And I became pretty self-educated. This was still making gains way ahead of everybody else. So, I was sort of a household name because I remember going to the nationals that year, not as a competitor, just I'd never seen nationals before. And I went and I ended up signing autographs and taking pictures with people and all kinds of things. So it was really kind of off the charts with the kind of gains I was making with and without. So this again is still 1987. The big thing then was understanding the difference between anabolics and androgens. And that was a big deal back then. So in the initial kind of educating yourselves about steroids and what they were and how they acted and reacted in the body, and I became a go-to expert. So this was me in 1988. So you can see I started getting thicker and thicker, etc. And just a side note here, this was me 1988, night before a contest in the hotel room. And then you can see the difference with the fat loading and the carb loading the next day, and the dehydration and rehydration, etc. So all kinds of things going on there that weren't just drugs. And then this was just muscle camp in 1989. And I just wanted to show this because this is how I looked all year long. And when I was at muscle camp in 1989, it was just as people were getting ready for the Olympia. And I was amazed at how many of them were completely out of shape. I won't mention names, but other than Lee Haney, I would say the top 10 guys at the Olympia that showed up at muscle camp 12 weeks from the Olympia were flat out fat. They weren't even close to being in shape. And that's how much they relied on pre-contest drugs and crash dieting and things like that. So, and then I became kind of a phenom at muscle camp because of the shape I could stay in, etc. This is just me signing autographs then. And then you see the big change. So you see from my natural years just sort of tinkling with steroids on a level that's laughable now, that females take way more than I was taking in 1986. But then you see the hardcore years, and the difference here is the testosterone entered the picture. So when I said I first started and self-educated and everything, there was a big dividing line between anabolic family of drugs and androgenic family of drugs. And I really had a fear thing about taking androgens, which was kind of hypocritical and kind of not just hypocritical, but kind of funny and irrational, because one of the favorite drugs I used back then was a drug called Anadrol 50, which was about as liver toxic as you could get, being an oral drug, etc. But it was just one that my body responded to incredibly. But as the 90s came along, I started using testosterone. And so I call these the hardcore years. And then you can just see, how I kept getting thicker and bigger and bigger and thicker, that kind of thing. So yeah, and you can see in this picture here, this is after 2 weeks off diet on vacation and at a photo shoot, and you can see the big fat pumpkin head there. And that's because when you're taking that kind of drugs and amount of drugs, when you start eating, then what happens is you really get puffy. Your body holds on to all kinds of fluids way more, especially with the androgens, than it used to be doing. So, and then this is the one I use just to promote this webinar that so many people wanted to hear and see from me. And then this was near the end. This was a photo shoot with Robert Kennedy. So this was back in, I don't know, early 2000s to mid 2000s, and this is one of my more iconic shots that ended up on a billboard in Toronto long time ago in the 90s, but definitely the hardcore years. And this was my final photo shoot. I was about 260 pounds, so yeah, very, very lean, vascular, veins popping, all that stuff, all that sort of thing. So you can definitely see the big difference between 1987, before the androgens, before testosterone use, and then once started using testosterone, et cetera, et cetera. So that was just kind of like a prelude to bringing you into the fray in terms of what I wanted to discuss and how I wanted to discuss it. But, one of the things I even wrote down a couple of notes. So if you guys want to see that again, I'll bring it up. But a couple of notes I wrote down that stands out in my mind right now is the higher I went in bodybuilding, and I went all the way to the top, photographers, publishers, Olympia competitors. But the higher I went, the seedier everything got. And that's because even at the Olympic level, there was no separating the competition world from the drug world. And they were so intimately connected that you end up with a bunch of pretty sketchy people being around the scene constantly. And that was always something that wore on my mind, and always something that kind of bothered me, because they say, if you want to know who you are, look at the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I remember at the time thinking, man, I'm not too crazy about that. So about that notion. So that was one of the things. And then, of course, when women's physique stuff took off, that really drove me out of the sport, when I started seeing the abuse of thyroid and laxatives and other hormones and Clenbuterol, and people ending up in the hospital and all the rest of it. It really kind of just started, freaking me out. So I got away from that. So, yeah. So anyway, that's my spiel to start off with. And Alex is just saying, what's Alex saying? What about a webinar for SARMs? I don't even know what you're referring to there. So, I don't know what I'm looking at some questions here. Let's just see if there's some good questions here. What type of testosterone? Usually, back in those days, Sustanon 250 was pretty common. Before contests, people used propionate. off-season enanthate and cypionate. Guys that like to get strong use cypionate because it would load the joints, tissue, what we call tissue leverage. You get a lot of water around the joints, which would make you stronger. But that also is something that would disappear, of course, as soon as you got off that drug. So you'd see a lot of guys blowing up and coming down and blowing up and coming down. So that was kind of the thing there. So Marty just wants to know, let me just see, what kind of total milligram doses per week did you do back then? No, I'm hoping this can get away from being a how-to kind of thing. That's really not my, not the reason for this. But the doses back then were, I didn't even know what the doses were this day and age until people started sending them to me after I did a live thing a while back on the death of Rich Piana and Dallas Carver. I had no idea what the doses had ballooned up to, but scary to say the least. But back then, Marty, I think doses of testosterone that I advocated to my clients were in and around 1,000 milligrams per week. 1,200 milligrams would be pushing it. I think near the end of my career at the scene, it was getting up near 1,500, but that's for people I thought were pretty crazy. And now it's up to 5 grams, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I can get into that if you want. And I don't know, Marty, if you mean like other drugs as well. If you do, just, retype in your question. So Tony just wants to know, can I compare the doses and types used by bodybuilders in the golden era to now? Well, there was a lot less in the golden era, Tony, and it was a lot less. It wasn't as year-round. I keep referring to people when I do these kind of lectures, if you look at the beginning of Pumping Iron, there's a scene right near the beginning where Arnold sort of comes back to Gold's gym, and you can tell he's not on anything. He's shaking hands with I think the guy working there is Tony, and he's making the rounds, and you can tell he's not on anything. And then as they progress, you can see as the drugs take effect and he gets all blasted. So one of the differences back then was when guys were off, they were actually off. And anyone who was under my tutelage during my years being involved with that, I tried to talk them into being off as well. 12 weeks on, 12 weeks off, 12 weeks on, 12 weeks off. Eventually that got shaved to 12 weeks on, 8 weeks off, 12 weeks on, 8 weeks off. And then now it's all year round. And then now there is, off season or off stack. So I started seeing before I left the scene, which just made me shake my head. If you were doing Proviron and Novadex and Clomid and HCG and a little bit of Primo, then you were technically off your cycle or off your stack, which it's absolutely ridiculous. You're either on or you're off. But this is how much drug dependent it can get and how drug dependent people became. It became a drug subculture. So that's why I left. So getting some good questions now. So yeah, 5 grams of, just to give people some context who don't understand any of this stuff, testosterone replacement therapy doses are anywhere from 100 to 200 milligrams of injectable testosterone a week, 200 being really high. So in our day with the pictures you just saw, I was doing about 1 gram. So that's 5 times that dose. And now people are doing 5 grams. So that's insane. Okay. So imagine instead of taking 2 Tylenol, extra strength Tylenol for your headache, you're now taking half a bottle just because the guy next to you is taking half a bottle. That's kind of where that was going. So when people were sending me today's stacks, it was just ridiculous. And still the golden era, and then I'll get to these other great comments. The other thing, Tony, about the golden era is there wasn't as much. Guys weren't using as much stuff. So eventually, people latched on. They were able to get Masterone, and they were able to get Trenbolone, and they were able to get all these other things that really the guys in that day really didn't have access to. For then you were limited, to really good quality anabolics, but not nearly the numbers that were coming along, as well as experimenting with other things like, and then insulin and growth hormone entered the scene. I never did either. They both scared the hell out of me, especially insulin. But I watched it happening. So yeah, it was very, very, so I'm just going to skip here. And then Amit just wants to know, what are the bikini girls taking these days? What's the long-term effects? I can't really speak for these days, Amit, because I'm out. But I will tell you, most of them lie like crazy on social media, trying to say they're natural, trying to say this was another reason I got out, because clients that I actually liked as people, I would watch them lie through their teeth on how they were natural and how they were this and that. And, or they would play with words and say things like steroid free, even though they were abusing thyroid and anti-estrogens and clenbuterol. And, you know, I talked about this in a couple of my books. Some of them would resort to snorting cocaine to get lean or to dry out before a contest. And then methamphetamine was entering the picture, and then appetite suppressants. And then, like I said, the laxative thing really was screwing girls up, and still is. It just, I just saw a couple of news stories on that. I'm posting about on Instagram within the next day or two. So that was, yeah, I mean, it's just freaky. I wouldn't pay much attention to what any of them say about what they're not taking, because I think if you get to a certain high enough level, like I said, the higher I got in the industry, the seedier it got, and no matter what the reputation was of the people I was around. So, which was disappointing coming from someone who was mentored by the great Bill Pearl, who was a gentleman in every sense of the word, and a really high quality individual. So getting back to Marty, just saying, yeah, the other drugs, well, it would depend, Marty, on what things were stacked with. So, you know, the more you did, the less, you know, the more synergistically they would work together. So at one time, you know, a cc of injectable Winstrol a day was an outrageous, you know, 100 milligrams of Masterone every other day wasn't outrageous if someone was getting ready for a contest. 1,000 milligrams of testosterone would stay. Maybe Deca, 200 milligrams twice a week, that kind of thing. Maybe 300 milligrams twice a week, that kind of thing. But, and then combinations. And then, of course, it would depend. Is someone getting ready for a contest? Are they off season? Because then, you know, you would choose your drugs according to where you were with contest prep and things like that. So that kind of thing there. So yeah, someone's having trouble loading the page, I guess. Let me just see. Okay, so Bella's just saying, I'm reading this as I'm reading it to you guys. So the biggest problem in the bodybuilding world was how much BS in the biz. There's a lot of bodybuilders say they are clean. Rich Piana was always truthful. The sport used to be about balance. Well, Rich Piana, the one thing that made me surprised about Rich Piana having 2 million Instagram followers was after he passed, I didn't know who he was. Like I said, I'm out of that world. And scrolling through his stuff, I would say 90% of his followers would never have taken. They're just people, like regular people. And that always made me scratch my head why regular people would follow like juice monsters as if they're advising them on the same thing. They're existing in two different worlds. It's like asking a NASA astronaut to teach you how to ride a bike. Like you're just talking about vastly different worlds. And the juice produced bodybuilders is another thing I can talk about, because there were bodybuilders who abused steroids and got nowhere. So one of the things I want to mention in this is my progression that I showed you through those years. You know, steroids were involved, but my progression was more due to expertise. I did see a ton of bodybuilders who were what I call juice produced, especially in the later years when growth hormone and insulin entered the picture. You would see people go from middleweight to super heavyweight in the span of a few years, which another thing that drove me out. I mean, why am I in this if it wasn't something I had to earn? Anyone can jab a needle in their ass. It didn't take a lot of talent to do that. So that was what, you know, sort of another thing that bothered me once that entered the scene. But you would see a difference between, this is what I was getting at, between people who had high receptor affinities for steroids and those who didn't. So you look at back in the day, I don't know how many of you will know this name, but Dan Duchesne, he was known as the steroid guru. In his own words, he was like, I've used steroids and I've abused steroids. And if you ever looked at him, you'd never know he would ever worked out in his life. I mean, he absolutely had a horrible physique. So for him, juice didn't do any good. And then I trained another Olympia level competitor guy, and he took such minuscule doses that at first I didn't even believe him, his doses. There were women taking way more than him, and he got to an Olympia level because his receptor affinities for the drugs was so high. It's like, think of it like a sponge, what it's going to soak up and what it isn't, and the quality of that sponge. So that's very, very good too. So let me see here. Now they're coming in fast and furious. So Bella, I hope that answered that. Yeah. And I think, to your point, Rich Piana maybe on social media was one of the ones, to be honest, at first about, I don't know, because I wasn't following any of those people. But what I've seen since then is a lot of people playing it down. And that, it's just ridiculous. If you're going to come out. But the more of the line goes on with the female side of the sport than anywhere else. Trust me. Yeah. So Alex is saying, how bad were the side effects from the steroids? Were some side effects different? Well, some people were immune to side effects. I never had any. You'd see guys losing their hair. I still have a full head of hair. Acne Vulgaris was the worst thing I saw. You would see guys abusing, especially the androgens, and they would look disgusting in the gym because they would have welt-sized acne all over them, and they'd wear t-shirts where blood was coming through the back of their t-shirts because they were laying on a bench or something. They would have to have a towel and then lay on the bench with their bag, and all this acne would be, these zits would be popping while they were working out, and there'd be blood on their t-shirts, and it was just gross. And yet you couldn't talk these guys out of maybe steroids aren't right for you. Like, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. They would just go get, Accutane and even with all the side effects that it has, and stay on the drugs. So the side effects varied. Some people were immune to them. I was lucky that way. It never really bothered me. But it was also dose related as well, right? So, I mean, it's the same thing with anything, right? I was going to say, if you snort a line of cocaine, what will that do? But if you snort a whole gram, I don't know much about that world, but what will that do? So a lot of it was dose related as well. So let me just see what Aaron's saying here. Aaron's just saying it's common for bodybuilding newbies to begin training and immediately start 4 or 5 drug stacks without any basic nutrition knowledge. It's almost standard practice these days. Well, you're preaching to the choir here, Aaron. It's another reason I got out. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. But another thing there is, I don't know if I blame the consumer so much about that, Aaron, because here's the thing. Most people who stay on the competitive side of the industry, they have a nice little cottage industry on the side going. So, okay, they'll train clients for contests, and maybe they have, I don't know, 10 or 15 clients. But they have a cottage industry on the side because their clients are from the real world. They don't know where to get illegal drugs like steroids. So your coach is actually your drug dealer, and they don't have to claim anything they make on that. So they're supplying all their clients with the drugs. So why wouldn't they advise a new client who just started training to, oh, you can get there faster, take this, this, and this, oh, and that'll be this much money, please. So it's a cottage industry among coaches. Let's get real about that. And that's just the way it is again, right? So it's a little drug subculture, and it went from being a physique culture to a drug subculture, and that was one of the bad things. So sorry if I'm missing your comments; they're just coming in. So, hey Scott, is growth hormone safer than any other form of steroids? As we age, our test levels drop. I'm 63 and still training. Wondering if growth hormone. The more people I talk to who know this, and I don't talk about trainers and trainees. I'm talking about endocrinologists, internal medicine specialists. They really don't see any upside for the growth hormone. I know it's popular with people like Stallone and people like that, but definitely you would want to take hormone replacement, testosterone replacement. As far as growth hormone, I'm not a doctor. I don't take it myself. Never have. Um, so that's something I'm, is it safer? I don't know. I think anytime you're taking a drug you don't really need increases your risk for no apparent good reason. So, yeah. So, is there a question here from Bella? Let me just see here. Jim Quinn, Barbarian Brothers, Mike Quinn, even Gaspari. I don't know what you're referring to. So maybe you can expand on that. So, um, yeah, and then the physiques just got too ridiculous for me too. It's in an upcoming article, but one of the reasons I got out was, when guys started using synthol, and you can do a quick search right now, just do Google Images and type in synthol bodybuilders and see what you see. It's absolutely ridiculous, but that was all around me at the time. And one time in the gym, someone stopped me and they were asking me if I saw the special on, I forget what A&E, I think it was, of the guy whose arms exploded, Greg Valentine. And it just disgusted me that people just assumed I was from the same world as that guy. And that just made me cringe. When I was doing bodybuilding, as I said in all these articles I've been writing lately, I wanted to do physique performance art. That's why I stopped competing and I just guest posed. I love the idea of physique as movable sculpture. And I love that notion, choreographing posing routines to music, to the beat, to entertain audiences. So it wasn't about me, it was about them. Just like looking at art, and once it started getting so far away from that, I just couldn't recognize being in it anymore. It just didn't make any sense as well. I wanted to get this comment in from Sherry. She said she's seen girls hit coke in the bathroom before a show. Yeah, I saw it all the time. Sherry, I've saw things that'll make. I mean, I got folks. I got a million stories I could tell you about this era of my career, and from the good to the bad to the ridiculous. I'll one up you on this one, Sherry. I was at a pro show once, and I went into the washroom, and I hear some movement, and I turn around and I see two sets of feet in the bathroom stall, and I'm thinking, okay, what's going on there? And then who comes out of the bathroom stall but the head of the IFBB and the head judge for that day? And they're in there and then of course they're wiping their noses in the mirror and getting ready to judge a contest, all hyped up on coke. So I was just like, really, this is how much you respect the bodybuilders and what they've put in to be here today, that you're going to get all coked up and then go out there and judge a contest? It was just stuff like that over and over again. When I retell it now, I'm wondering why it took me so long to get out. But yeah, so Cigar, let me just say, are you still using steroids? No, I haven't. I've walked away from that world long time ago. Testosterone replacement therapy is not the same as steroid use. I take androgen gel, testosterone replacement gel, and that's all. So, so Bella's just saying, when I was talking about the drug monsters, the day some of them covered with acne at the camp, he was asked us to take off his tank top when we were. Yeah, it's just gross. I've dealt with people like that. And they've got these acne scars forever. I mean, dug right deep into their skin. Not to mention, back in the day, another problem that came was. Let me just go back and hide that comment. So another thing that started was counterfeit drugs. So as soon as that started, guys were filling, I remember one story, a guy ended up in the hospital with an abscess, thought he was taking Winstrol V. The Winstrol V was replaced with WD-40. Stuff like that was going on all the time. Even guys that I knew that I trusted would get their steroids legitimately and then suck out half of a vial of the actual steroid and replace that half vial with just vegetable oil. So guys were getting half of what they thought they were getting. And then, of course, when they didn't get the results they were used to, they doubled their dose. So then if they ended up with the real thing again, then they would get gynecomastia or have all other kinds of problems. So the fake scene. And then when they started bringing in their own powders from China and other places and mixing it themselves in their own kitchens and whatnot, what would happen is they couldn't dissolve the powder fine enough to pass through a regular sized dart. So guys would have to buy wider and wider bore syringes in order to get this stuff to pass through a syringe into the body, which isn't necessarily good because they'd end up with too large a granule size that couldn't be metabolized. So guys were ending up with little stone-like shapes in their shoulders and their backs that you could actually rub and feel beneath the surface like little pebbles. And sometimes those got infected. And I knew top-level competitors who had to stop competing because of the abscesses that got infected, because when you couldn't dissolve the granules short enough, they would get up near the plunger of the vial when you were extracting it, and little bacteria would build up in there. And then they would take an injection and it would get all infected and they would get abscesses, and that would have to be cut out. So yeah, very, very scary stuff. Drove me completely out. So Tom's just saying, hey, Scott, thanks for shedding light on the industry. The more I looked into over the years, the more I got involved in the gym scene and completely lied to as a young man. Idolized Arnold and Ronnie Coleman, Hulk Hogan, just to come to realize they all use drugs. And just like the saying that all the supplements they're trying to sell that just got the way they were just a bunch of propaganda. Yeah, supplements don't do a whole lot. And I still don't get why anyone buys into some former Olympia guy who's got a line of supplements to sell as if he built his body with any kind of supplement other than pharmaceuticals. Is really kind of silly. But that's the consumer mindset. I don't know why it works that way. But, I need to make another point as well. I don't want anyone to assume the pictures I showed and stuff were all due to steroids and the progress I made or that other guys made who didn't have the best genetics. Because if that were the only factor to progress, then all the steroid dealers would have been Mr. Olympia competitors. And trust me, they weren't. So, I would see guys abusing stuff on a scale unimaginable, way more than I ever did. And they never had very good physiques. So there was still expertise involved. There was still figuring it out involved. So that, that's really, really important, important stuff. So, and yeah. So let me just, what's Marty saying here? I don't know if GH has nothing to do with muscle mass. I think it has something to do with muscle mass because I saw Marty when, don't forget how old I am, long in the tooth, as we say. So I was around in the era before there was GH. And let's remember, before there was GH and insulin, Arnold was 6'2" and won the Olympia at 235 pounds. All right. Guys now are pushing 275 pounds, 260 pounds. I was 260 pounds without growth hormone. But I saw guys, let's take Dexter Jackson. He won the Olympia. He now competes at 250? He won the nationals as a middleweight, 176 pounds. So when you think about that, yeah, GH has something to do with muscle mass, but it's in combination, of course, with testosterone and insulin and thyroid hormone, etc. So it's not just, I call this the steroid years for clickbait or whatever, get people to participate. But don't forget, these are the core drugs you take. And then after the core drugs, when you're taking super physiological doses of these things, then you also need peripheral drugs to counteract side effects or make things work better. So like I said, testosterone and DECA wasn't enough. You add growth hormone. And if you add growth hormone, you add insulin. If you add insulin, then suddenly you need to add thyroid because growth hormone downregulates thyroid. So now you're taking thyroid, you're taking insulin, then you're often taking things to control water. You're taking an anti-estrogen because otherwise you're going to get gynecomastia. I knew dozens of guys who had to go to surgery to get their bitch titch cut out. And then, of course, like we said, you're taking Accutane to control acne. And with Clenbuterol, back in the day, here's something you can look up. I saw many cases of what's called ophthalmos, side effect from abusing Clenbuterol, where people's, it's called bulging eye syndrome. So their eyes would start to bulge, almost like looking like really, really scared all the time. And that was a side effect of that stuff. So, yeah, people, and when people keep wondering, like, oh, well, like, would you go back to that world? No, I wouldn't go back. Anything. I'm just, I'm like, if I can have this legitimate conversation with people over and over again, I don't know why anybody goes back to that world. Any sane person. I mean, you have to, Marty, I'll get to your question in a minute, but I'm going to bring up Ronnie Coleman for a minute, and I don't mean in any disrespectful way at all, but you have to question how much someone's identity is tied up in their muscles when they are so damaging their body that they're going to be a cripple. But they'll make that risk of trade-off in order to keep the reputation of whatever they think people think of them, right? So instead of retiring and stuff, if you watch the documentary on Ronnie Coleman, he's still after injuring the discs in his back, doing front squats with 500 pounds. He goes back to it. He goes back to it until he can't walk anymore and has over a dozen surgeries. Like, I had back surgery back in 2000. I had 2 discs removed. I remember what that was like. And so I never went back to, oh, how soon can I get back to abusing my body? Like, that was it. I was done. So, Angie's making a good point here. Are these bodybuilders rich? How do they afford it? Well, the up and comers, they make a living by selling to, like I said, it's a cottage industry. You can hang up a shingle and tell people you're a contest prep coach. Then you've got 5 or 6 clients. Then you've got 5 or 6 people you can sell drugs to pay for your own stacks. That's how it worked back then. If you were lucky enough to get endorsement contracts and you were at that top of the mountain, then you usually let go of that world. You didn't have to bother with it. But that's how it worked. It's almost like multi-level marketing, right? So I take these steroids, but they're really expensive. So if I can sell them at a markup to 5 people and they can sell to 5 people below them, then I can buy more and mine gets cheaper. And that's how it worked back then. So, but yeah, in some upcoming articles that I've got, I talked about another thing that drove me away was I was watching guys take out mortgages on their homes for a steroid stack to compete in a local contest. We're not talking about guys who had a chance of making a career someday. They were just, they were, financing a steroid stack for a local contest. This is how much, what other people think of them meant. And I never wanted ever to be that guy. So Dave's just saying, when I was training in Mississauga, you approached me and asked me where I'd gotten the Gray Raiders Howie Long t-shirt. Lyle's death from brain cancer. Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you saw on the NFL Network, they do a football life, and Lyle Alzado came pretty clean about that. And back in the day, there was Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease from growth hormone that came from cadavers that had that bacteria in it or whatever that caused brain cancer. And he got caught into that. And but it was one of those things where back in that day, he denied and denied and denied for a lot of years. And then, of course, he couldn't deny it anymore. So so that was pretty scary. I want to go to, I just got some questions that came. People wanted to know where I learned about drug stacks and doses, and assuming I learned from other bodybuilders. People don't understand what a maverick and leader I was in the industry back in the day. And that's not bragging rights. This is just telling the truth. So while I was doing my master's degree, that kind of stuff came pretty easy to me. So I spent a lot of the time, I've always been a hermit, always crave solitude. I spent a lot of my time in the medical libraries at university researching this stuff. I had a CPS with me constantly. And I ended up, before the Ben Johnson inquiry, the Dubbin inquiry, I ended up speaking with doctors, reaching out to people. writing articles about it. I was the guy who designed stacks and did all those kind of things. As a matter of fact, back in those days, you could say that there was a certain faction of a sports entertainment industry that owed a lot of their stacking to knowledge I provided them, as well as pharmaceuticals I provided them, and people I know provided to them. So a lot of the times what you saw on your TV screen, I would often go, yeah, I had something to do with that. So, but back then, getting back to the where I learned it all from, I remember when the Dubbin inquiry came around after the Ben Johnson thing. There was a court case involving steroids, and I was called to be a witness. And I remember the Canadian government lawyers from the government who are actually at the Center for Drug Testing in Sport or whatever, said that Scott Abel is the expert when it comes to performance enhancing drugs. And at the time, that blew my mind because I didn't consider myself an expert at all. All I was doing was reviewing the literature. Now, I certainly knew a lot more than the plate heads who competed, because they didn't really care what was in a bottle. Tell them what to take, they'd take it. Tell them how much of it to take, they'd take it. That didn't take, was sort of a monkey, tell the monkey how to get the pellet and they'll go get the pellet. That's, there wasn't much more to it than that. I remember I had a client before a contest. I would send my clients to certain doctors I knew would provide certain things. And I sent a client to a doctor for his diuretics, because that's one thing that we bodybuilders couldn't get. We could get all the steroids in the world. Incidentally, after the Ben Johnson inquiry, the demand for steroids didn't go down. It skyrocketed. It went crazy up. It's like in this day and age, when you hear that they might introduce new gun laws, sales of guns go way up. It was the same thing back then. But I remember I sent this client to a doctor I really liked. And so he got his prescription for the diuretics for his contest. And he called me up and he said, so Scott, how do I take the diuretics next week I said, well, take it like it says on the bottle. He said, it doesn't say anything on the bottle. I said, well, what did the doctor say? And he said, the doctor said to ask you because you know way more about it than he does. And I was like, well, okay. So a lot of the times I didn't know what I knew or how much I knew and how well I knew it until I got reinforcement from outside sources who could recognize that I knew what I knew. It was kind of like when I went to muscle camp and I became the go-to guy for bodybuilding advice and nutrition advice. I didn't know I was that far ahead of everybody till I was around everyone who could recognize someone who was that far ahead. So I had that a few times in my career where people would let me know. I remember I got a call from Chicago University. This is separate from the steroid thing. 1 year from a professor there, and he was asking me about my refeeds. I don't know if the cycle diet had a name yet, but I was telling him, I eat this way, and then on the weekend I eat this way, and I do this. And he was blown away. He was like, well, I don't know if you know this, but you're like 10 years ahead of the research, because we're finding exactly what you're saying. I was talking about optimizing metabolism and how you lose more fat by overeating if you've been undereating and all this kind of stuff. So it was really kind of, all those kind of things. So very, very kind of important stuff. So let me see what some of these other questions were here. So let me just see. Oops. Someone's asking what's the most extreme cycles. I don't know. I never, I was always about the moderation. I think that's why I lasted as long as I did. I think we already covered the doses. And what was my favorite one and why did I like it? Now, this is an interesting question, and I'll answer it in an interesting way. I never fetishized the drugs. It never made sense to me, but I remember watching guys who did, and it made my skin crawl. It was weird. I remember once I sent a couple people to Europe as mules because you could get really cheap steroids back then. If you went to a small town in Europe, certain places on the coast of France and Italy, you could go to a really small town and go to the pharmacy And they would literally, go to the front door, lock the door, put the close sign on the door, or have you come the next day for, when it was siesta time, and you would go in the back room and they would set you up with cases and cases of whatever you wanted. So anyway, one time, this guy comes back, and he, laid out all the stuff we got, on the bed, and we were sort of dividing it up. And I remember him fetishizing, like he was looking at this stuff like it was magic. I mean, it was almost like he wanted to sleep with it, right? Like a teddy bear. And it freaked me out. I was just like, this is what it is. It's part of the game. That's all that it is. It's nothing. This isn't magic. This isn't. But people in the industry, they fetishize these drugs. It's really, really kind of weird. And I always found it weird. I never found it as I think anyone that's ever dealt with me that way about those things back then would agree. I was never that way about it. So yeah, that was kind of freaky along those lines. I'll tell another story in a minute. Just asking, is testosterone shots safe? They're safe if they're done, if they're done right. If you know how to do an injection, they're safe. They're relatively safe, but again, it's dose dependent, dose related. If you're talking about for hormone replacement, then they're safe. I prefer the gel. Because I had my fill of injections when I was in the hardcore bodybuilding thing, and I don't ever want to inject anything ever again if I don't have to. So yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on the dose. It depends on hygiene. It depends upon what that kind of stuff. So hopefully that answered your question. So David's just saying 20 years ago, I remember you were known as the best personal trainer available. A good friend at the time won the Seniors Ontario with your help. He followed you religiously, a night and day transition, diet and contest prep. Well, thanks. I don't really call what I did and do personal training. Personal trainers are people who put people through workouts in the gym. I'm a one-on-one coach. It's a bit different. That's why I can train people all over the world. But I appreciate the comment. And yeah, I was known as the trainer of champions. It was actually kind of funny and another sort of sideways compliment to me. I remember Robert Kennedy started calling me the trainer of champions. And then he called me into his office one day and said, well, I can't call you that anymore. I got a call from Joe Weider, and that's his moniker. And, he had it first. And so it was like weird because the two top publishers in the industry were fighting over me. So it was kind of like, it was kind of interesting. So, and so Paul's just saying, the gel didn't work for me, so I'm on the injections. Again, could be dose related. Could be if you're really hairy, it can get stuck in the hair. But yeah, if the injections work better for you, that's fine. Like I said, I would prefer. I'm just not going to do injections again. So, and then Perry's just saying, Cycle Diet rocks. Go see the Cycle Diet, folks. It's actually, that's the wrong. I gotta remove that, Perry, because it's the wrong place now. That we're getting rid of that. We're getting rid of that. Link. It's going to just go to scottabelfitness.com/cycle diet. That'll take you there. Perry, if you want to remove that comment and put that down, that would be great. Another thing I remember from the early days, and this was funny, one of the things I recall, like really specifically, I was doing my master's degree at Queen's University in Kingston, and right off the main drag on the way home from the gym was a tack shop, a veterinarian place in the front and a tack shop in the back. So a tack shop, for horses and stuff. And this was before, again, a couple of years before the Ben Johnson thing. And you walk into this tack shop and could literally get testosterone on the shelf, like along with like DMSO, all those kind of things. And you could really so I remember thinking, should I get it? Should I not get it? Because the testosterone came in cases of 10. So there's 2 rows of 5, and you could get propionate, enanthate, cypionate, mostly enanthate and propionate. And at the time, like I told you before, this is when I was scared to death of the androgens, but they were about $10 a bottle. You could sell them for 10 times that much at that time. So near the end, before it didn't last long because of what happened to Ben Johnson, and then everything got taken off the shelves, but it wasn't even legal. I literally could have walked in there to the tack shop and, bought some stuff like and bought cases of testosterone right there. And near the end, I did it a couple times, and then everything got removed from the shelf. But that's how open and honest, and as soon as you drove it underground, is when everything kind of went haywire. But so did the sport itself. I wouldn't even call it a sport anymore. I just think it's crazy, actually, and anything involved. It's especially harming for the women. I mean, I don't know how many times I have to keep saying that, but over and over again, it's just incredibly harmful. Still there? Sorry about that, folks. I keep getting these other notifications. Sorry about that. So hopefully everyone's still there, and I'm back. So that was it. Some years. Like I said, I got 1,000 stories that I could tell about all this stuff. And yeah. Perry wants to know what are what are some of the health scares I saw others have? Well, everything from death to cancer to heart attacks to, like I said, abscesses that created fevers that almost killed people, to sepsis, to infections, to near amputations, to you name it. I mean, and a few that have died from diuretics abuse. So, yeah. There's some good questions still coming in. Does something they're using today cause the bubble gut? I think it's just the doses, Tony. I think, and people are saying it has to do with insulin and growth hormone. But yeah, there's tons and tons of articles. If you go on YouTube and look for, gut distension of bodybuilders or whatever, you'll see tons of it. But again, that's what drove me out, is seeing all that. For me, that had nothing to do with classic physique. That had nothing to do with physique at performance art. Yeah. So, Marty, what are some of the compounds to completely stay away from? Well, I would say DNP, which again, women tend to gravitate to more than anything. That got popular for a real short time, and then of course it was killing people. And then certain toxins can actually cause you to lose weight, and people think that's a good idea. And then safe things or not safe things, legal things to stay away from would be, like I said, laxatives, diuretics for no reason. I mean, competing, yeah, diuretics before a contest, whatever. But diuretics, to just control, just control your water weight and things like that. That's just insanity. So, so I would say DNP stands out. Clenbuterol, because of the abuse. Again, a lot of it is an abuse factor to stay away from. So, I end up with a lot of females who are abusing thyroid like crazy. And that's dangerous stuff to do. So it throw your body completely out of whack, and sometimes permanently. So, that has a lot to do with things as well. So, you combine abusing thyroid with abusing laxatives, and, and then people are like, how did this happen to me? How did it not happen to you? So that's, that's an important thing, I think, to acknowledge as well. So that's a good question. So, so I figured that, hopefully, Is there any other questions that people want to ask? Let me see here. And then I was hoping for something, things are a little more, anyway, like I said, I got so many stories and I could go in all kinds of different ways, but sometimes I have to be reminded of them, right? So, Marty, again, when guys come off, what was your thoughts on post cycle therapy, Clomid, HCG, Novadex? Nah, I don't know. I'm out of that world. In my day, you went 12 weeks on, 12 weeks off. You didn't need any of this stuff. You got your blood tests and you were fine. But if you're going to stay on all year long and then you say you're off and you're off for 4 weeks or 5 weeks, I mean, it just don't even get me started. So, so that was, that was some, I leave that up to people can go online, Marty, for those kind of arguments and find out about them. It doesn't interest me. I want to train people, who have real normal lives, who all this stuff is just foreign to them, right? So, ECA stacks. No, again, I never used them. I took ephedrine once, and I did not like the way it made me feel. And that was once at a normal dose that I think I got from my endorsement contract back then when I was with, I forget, it was either with Muscle Tech or with NextCare. I can't remember, but I didn't even take it with the aspirin either. And that was enough for me. I hated it. So, but I also knew a very popular fitness model from the day who was on the cover after cover after cover. And she would pop by my house on her. I've always been a morning person, which means I go to bed really early. And a lot of the friends I had in the industry back then, they would pop by my place before going out for the night because I'd be going to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock and they'd need something to do because I guess the bars didn't get going till like 10 or 11 o'clock. So they come by my house till my bedtime. And anyway, I knew this one very, very popular fitness model. She would come by my place and she would pop just a handful of ephedrine just to go out to party. Like she would literally, I'd watch her pour a bunch in the palm of her hand and then wash it down with whatever alcohol she had or whatever. And then out she would go. And I was just like, happy heart attack to you. Now I don't know if she ever had any problems, but that's how much disregard these kind of people had for their bodies at the time. So meeting Jay Cutler, it amazed me how he was able to rise to the level he did in drug usage without side effects. Is that because he's lucky or he might pay the price later in life? Who's to say? I don't know what his doses were and stuff, but I mean, a lot like myself, I never got really, really bad acne. I never got, really, really bad gyno. I never got hairy. I never lost my hair. So yeah, I mean, with intelligent use, you can mitigate a lot of the potential side effects, but at the same time, a lot of it is genetics. So, but yes, there will absolutely be a price to pay for being that big, that long. Absolutely. I mean, my shoulders are shot. A lot of that's age. A lot of that's hanging and banging at a high level. Any high level athlete in a collision sport or a high intensity sport later in life is going to pay for those years, period. It's been documented over and over and over again. It doesn't have to be bodybuilding, it could be anything. But I think a lot of my shoulder limitations now are due to injecting into my shoulders, especially Winstrol B. They said it dries up the synovial fluid beds. And I think that came back to haunt me at a young age. Younger age, old age, but younger age. So I think that, I think that had a lot to do with things. So just going to close it out on this. Neil, yes, it's healthy for men to use TRT. Of course it is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a thing that doctors could prescribe. So Tony's just saying, personal question, what pro physiques did you find the most aesthetic back in the day? And it's interesting because I would say the best physiques I ever saw are different from the best Mr. Olympias I ever saw. So the best physique I ever saw was Bob Paris. The best Mr. Olympia would be Lee Haney. Things just got too out of control after him. And before him, the aesthetic was there. So maybe Arnold in second. I can still watch Pumping Iron and be impressed and go, wow. I don't watch anybody from today's era and am impressed. When I watched Rich Piana training in the gym and nothing was moving because he was so inflated, I was just like, there was nothing motivating about that to me. That's just me. That's just me in the era I come from. And of course, Bill Pearl being my mentor, but I never saw Bill Pearl in his, I'm talking about people I actually physically saw. So I would say Bob Paris was the best physique. Lee Haney was the best Mr. Olympia by far. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. So that's my hour, folks. Hopefully people like that. Yeah, so I don't know what you're referring to here. Oh, sorry. So let me just post this because it looks important. Recently, I saw on YouTube a channel that promotes steroid use led by a guy posing as a doctor of steroids. Yeah, a lot of guys talk like that. Muscle Mag wanted to name me like that one time. That's another story for another time, but I said no. An attempt to have a bunch of young athletes complete a challenge to gain as much muscle in 30 days using steroids. I don't know. I don't know. That's a sign of the social media era we live in, I guess. You know, there's a lid for every pot. I'm just, yeah, just whatever. That's sad. Sad, Alex. I'm glad you told me about it, though. Yeah. So hopefully, folks, you will share all this and get it out there. You know, once again, people say they want these webinars and then they don't show up. So I guess they'll watch them in reverse, but I can't answer your questions if you're not here. So hopefully you'll be here next time. And I'll just post the cycle diet here. And not even ebooks, Perry, just the cycle diet. The course is on there as well. So yeah, so hopefully, folks, you got something out of this. If not, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to be here. So, yeah, thanks for being out there, asking some good questions. By all means, hit your share button, and I'll see you all in the next video.